Okay.
Hello,
Good morning.
everyone. We're here today with Rafael Mariani, and he's going to talk about a person who inspired a lot of his career, Richard Welch, and also Ron Estes. And Ralph, you're a former CIA officer and with a long career, and I want to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a
Okay.
little about Dick Welch.
Sure. Thank you, John. And thank you for having me on your podcast, which I know is a
Thank
diversified
you.
podcast, and I'm happy to be part of it for today. Um, I'm Ralph or Rafael Mariani. I was born up in New Jersey, migrated to Miami, Florida with my mom and dad, and grew up in Miami, went to college, high school in Miami, college in Florida, State College, and then moved on to Kentucky for a master's program, and then was signed on to the CIA in 1967. I left the CIA, retired in 1996. I was a mid-level ops officer. That's more or less all I was good at, because I tried to do something else on retirement, failed miserably, and went back to being an ops officer as a contractor. And I'm still an ops officer working with the military at Fort Bragg. My assignments included Greece, and then that was my second assignment. My first one was Saudi Arabia. And in Greece, I was a young sort of junior officer in the station. My job was to chase Soviet bloc targets, see if we could get them to help us. I had nothing to do with the local environment or targets, or because I didn't have sufficient Greek. I had street Greek, so I chased after third world country targets and Soviet bloc targets for 4 years. In the midst of that and Ron Estes was my deputy the entire time and my boss and inspiration and mentor. And in the summer of 1975, Richard Welch came from Peru to lead the station with Estes. Um, so that's where I was when Richard Welch showed up in the summer of 75. As you know, he was murdered on December the 23rd in the evening in front of his house. December the 23rd, 1975, by a terrorist group, Marxist-Leninists, known as 17 November. Um, that's the overview. Uh, I think one thing that has to be said about 75 and Welch's arrival is just a year earlier, in the summer of, I think it was late June of 74, there was a crisis on the island of Cyprus when Greece made a move to overthrow President Makarios. I think the guy they had handpicked as a puppet was a fellow named Samson. I can't remember the full name. It was a fiasco. Turks invaded, and the thing was over in a few days, and the Greeks were humiliated. The Greek junta was overthrown by that, leading to the return to Greece of a wonderful politician by the name of Constantine Karamelis, who represented New Democracy Party. And he took over the country in July of 74. Democracy returned, and it's been there ever since, doing very well. One of the success stories of Europe. But there was a lot of activities prior to that where military was in charge. The military was so humiliated by the Cyprus crisis, we'll call it, that they began a scapegoating campaign in the press and in the media, scapegoating the United States, specifically the Central Intelligence Agency, but the cause of their humiliation. This, of course, couldn't be
Yeah.
further from the truth. Many Greeks still believe it to today. But the bottom line is
I
that
think most people still believe it today. And I
yeah,
came into this interview,
uh-huh,
I came into this interview, I think, with the same assumption. But then doing my research, it looks like quite a different picture. But maybe can you tell us a little bit about Dick Welch? Because he was just a remarkable man.
yes,
And within many organizations, who is kind of uh, tagged early on in their career for top leadership position, and Dick Welch was one of those people.
Well stated, John. Dick Welch was born in Connecticut in the late 20s. I think 28 to be exact, or 7. Um, he born in Connecticut, grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, because his father was a successful stock broker who lost everything with the uh, um, stock market crash. They moved to Providence where
During the
his
Great
father.
Depression.
Yes, sir. Yeah, his father moved to Providence, and began a short career as in selling insurance. And then later in the 30s, he joined the Army and was very successful. He became a colonel. He fought in World War II. He's a successful author, the father. And he fought in the Korean War, and he became close to Dwight Eisenhower, the president, who named him the spokesman for the Pentagon in the 50s. But his son did very well in school. He went to one of the most established, esteemed schools in America, known as Providence Cathedral, which is the oldest high school in America. And he started studying ancient classical Greek when he was a freshman or sophomore in high school. So you can imagine he did so well that he won a scholarship to Harvard. He graduated at the top of his class in Harvard in 1951. In those days, John, a lot of the CIA ops officers, obviously they were men. It was a man's world, and most of them were from the Ivy Leagues. That changed in the 60s.
Yeah.
But he would have joined the military like his dad. However, as a child, he had had a terrible accident. I don't know, it was a rock or arrow or what, and he lost the sight in his one eye. I'm not sure which eye. And for that reason, he wasn't accepted into the military. He joined the CIA, must have been 22, because he didn't go to graduate school. He was young. And naturally,
Yeah. I
he
think he
had
joined
class.
right out of college, right?
Right, right. In 51, yeah, summer of 51, say.
Yeah.
Um,
But he was
and
assigned as a civilian employee of the Army. Is that right?
that was his cover.
Yeah.
That would have been the cover. Um, and he was sent to Greece with classical Greek, and he taught himself modern Greek. He spent incredibly, John, 7 years there. That's very
Yeah.
unusual for assignment. Usually it's 2 or 3. Um, so unless you're
And
excelling,
worth noting also that the time that Dick Welch joined the CIA, there was enormous trust in government and kind of belief in, I think, what America was. You had the post World War II, high America as savior of the world. And I think 5% of Dick Welch's graduating class joined the CIA as well.
that sounds right. That sounds right.
Yeah.
I
Which is a
believe that.
remarkable number, I think. Yeah.
And probably at
And
Princeton, if I know at
he
least,
himself applied.
right. I know at least 3, 4 graduates at sort of the same time, 51, who were colleagues of mine. Some of them passed away, and they went straight from Princeton to the CIA and had successful careers. Um, but Welsh, I don't know exactly what he did in those 7 years. I have to assume he worked on. I mean, we're talking the 1950s. We're talking the Cold War. We weren't out to get Greece. We were
Yeah.
out to get Soviet Union. We didn't want to see them succeed anywhere. The policy of containment began by George Kennan in the late 40s was the rule of the day. And so I'm sure he, like me, later on in the 70s, worked against communist targets. He was too junior to be involved in covert action or anything like that. But be as it may, he had a successful 7-year tour. At the same time, John, Ron Estes, who was from Northern Virginia, who had gone to Virginia Tech, who had joined the Marines, who was a semi-pro baseball player and, golden boy kind of guy, Ron Estes joins, I think, probably in 53, I'm going to guess. And because he was in the
Yeah.
Korean War. Probably went from the Korean War and the Marines to the CIA. I think they recruited him. Uh, and he went to Greece. And he had a 6-year tour. But he was serving up in Kavala near Bulgaria, getting the migrants who were coming out of Bulgaria, helping settle them, but more importantly, get intelligence reports from them on what was going on in Bulgaria. I mean, this is when our eyes were on this is just a few years after World War II.
Right.
And we were worried about your Iron Curtain by Churchill's announcement about the Iron Curtain. So Bulgaria was not so much a target of ours, but we were certainly interested in what the Soviets were doing there. And they were very
Yeah. And
successful.
Ron ended up writing a novel about this, that
That's
period of
right.
his career, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy. I think he wrote a couple of books. By the way, Mr. Welsh's father also was an author, successful author. But back to Bulgaria and Kavala. So these two guys started their careers in Greece in the 50s, but didn't overlap that much. They knew each other,
Right.
is what I understand from Ron, who, by the way, retired in St. Augustine. I'm in Melbourne. So we're about 2 hours apart, hour and 45 minutes. So I would go up the last few years before he died last October, and shoot the what with Ron Estes, and I was thrilled to do it. And we told stories and ate
Yeah.
cheeseburgers. Ron,
You can say that word if you want, by the way.
which okay, chewed the fat. How's that?
Yeah. There. Chew the
Anyway,
fat. Chew the fat.
there you go. There you go. So, my relationship with Estes was ongoing. I think we sort of lost contact with each other in the early 2000s, but it was fun to reunite with him and listen to him. And he had a great sense of humor, as did Welsh. They both had great senses of humor. They're both street men. Couldn't be more different in personality, but they were street men. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and I want to keep going on Dick Welch's
yeah,
career, but
Welsh.
I mean,
Right.
really,
Yeah,
you got into this maybe even more for Ron Estes than Dick Welch, but this remembering Dick Welch's life and honoring his murder has been a mission for both of you, and you're kind of carrying the flag forward here.
that's a good way of putting it. But Welsh and Estes united, sort of reunited, as after their Greek tours in Cyprus in the early 60s, let's say
That's
61.
right.
And they put in 3-year tours in Cyprus. And the beauty of their assignment to Cyprus, Nicosia, was that they were both case officers. They didn't have to worry about evaluations. They didn't have to worry about management. They didn't have to worry about stepping on somebody's toes. They were just out on the street having a ball. It's the most fun
Yeah.
job you can imagine. It's the most fun
And is it
job you can
correct that while they were assigned to Cyprus, they were the only two fluent Greek speakers in the station?
I wouldn't doubt it. I haven't. I wouldn't doubt that a bit. Greek is a tough language, and you don't master it in 6 months or 8 months. But they had come from, and it's wonderful that they were assigned together. They went to chess tournaments, to bridge tournaments. They played embassy softball. They loved tennis. They were just having a ball, and they were raising families. Each of them ended up having 3 children, 3 and 3. Um, uh, and at the end of that 3 years, towards the end, and this is a crucial part of our story, they made a pact, P-A-C-T, pact. And that pact was that someday they would return to Athens as chief and deputy and sort of take over the station, do a coup, the 2 Greek guys. And of course, it's fascinating that neither one of them were Greek. You couldn't get more Anglo-Saxon than Estes and Welsh. They developed
Yeah.
something. I'm glad I thought of this. They developed something in their relationship, which lasted from the mid 50s to the mid 70s. They developed something that is unique to the Greek society, unique to Greek culture. It's called Philotimo. Philo is friend. Philotimo is it's if you look it up, Philotimo, it's impossible to define. I've tried to get a good definition, and there isn't one. It has to do with relationship. It has to do with society. It has to do with culture. It has to do with philanthropy. It has to basically, I think in America, you and I have just met and we've taken a liking to each other. We really know each other and like each other, the sort of thing I say, I have John's back. Having your back is sort of Philotimo.
Yeah.
And again,
And
this is
maybe
something.
I'll just read the summary that I pulled up here. So, Philotimo
Sure.
is a deeply meaningful Greek concept meaning love of honor, but it encompasses much more: a sense of duty, dignity, sacrifice, and profound responsibility to family, community, and country, motivating selfless acts of kindness, respect, and striving for personal excellence and legacy, often described as the ultimate virtue of living a good life. It's about doing what's right and honorable, expecting nothing in return, and connecting to a heritage that values community over self. I
You
think
almost
that's so
have me.
perfect for Dick and
Yeah.
Ron. Yep.
I'm so glad I thought of the Philotimo thing. And the fact that they were non-Greeks and had the Philotimo thing is just amazing. It's amazing. And it's a focus or core of this story, in my opinion, is that Philotimo.
Yeah.
So,
And they
um,
have Philotimo, but then even just making the pact, I mean, it's unheard of in the
unheard of.
CIA. And so just that they would even be so bold as to make the pact or make that presumption that they would be together is remarkable in and of itself. Forget the fact that it ended up coming to fruition.
It's audacious. It's audacious because normally two officers who are on the same sort of path at the same level, almost the same age, they basically should be competitors. They shouldn't be planning on one being a deputy and one being a chief. If they're really, they should both want to be chiefs
Yeah,
or make the fact that I'll fight you for the Athens job. No, they wanted to go back together. And what a wonderful thing if it had lasted 3 or 4 years and hadn't been interrupted by bastards. We would have had a
yeah,
wonderful leadership of Athens for 4 years, and they would have just loved the having fun together. Anyway, back to Welsh. Welsh is the subject. He went. The agency must have known after just 2 tours that he was destined for the seventh floor. The seventh floor, by the way, in Langley is the leadership floor. It's
yeah,
the pinnacle. It's if you're on the seventh floor, you're a stud. So uh, they decided, interestingly, great career management service. They decided to send um, Welsh to Latin America. Needless to say, he mastered Spanish quickly, and he had 3 tours in Latin America. One
yeah,
was in Guatemala as a deputy. Then he went to Guyana, Georgetown, made famous by Minister Jones 10 years later. He went to Georgetown, and from Georgetown, as chief there, he went to Lima, Peru. Important assignments, and he did well in all 3 of them, and climbed up to
yeah.
the senior
And
service
in
at that.
Guyana, he was chief of station, and Peru, he was chief of staff, I believe.
No, chief of station. We don't have
In
a chief
Peru?
of staff. Yeah, we don't have a chief of
Okay.
staff.
Okay, okay.
Maybe on the 7th floor, but
Yeah,
not
it said
overseas.
chief of staff when I was doing my research. Okay. Good to know.
Typo. Yeah. So now we come to the time where the pact is completed. Welsh is assigned to Athens. He goes there in July of 75. At the same time, we got a new ambassador, Jack Hubich from Latin America, who had a relationship, a professional relationship with Welsh, and they took
Right.
over the embassy and the station. This is a year after the crisis. Now
And the
we
crisis is
Cyprus
the
crisis.
fall of the junta or the
Yeah,
invasion of
same.
Cyprus or the coup in
It's the
Cyprus.
same. It's the same. The fall of the
Okay.
junta and the invasion of Cyprus, the same.
Okay.
So this is a year later, and we get a new ambassador and a new COS. Um, However, the junta is still angry, and there's still stuff about the agency brought us down a year ago. And 17 November is now in country. They have returned out of exile, just like Karamelis did out of exile to run the country. They came out of exile to
Yeah.
foment revolution. They believed in continuous revolution. They were the Trotskyites. That's their core in Marxist-Leninism.
And where was 17 November formed?
It was formed in Paris during the late 60s, during the tumultuous late 60s. A very small group. I would love to know if I would love to have a French service guy sitting beside me talking about 17 November and its creation, because I'm sure they had a file on them. And they started planning, and their main target was the CIA because of what had happened the year before, and their belief that the CIA had caused the humiliation in Cyprus. Um,
Right.
uh, Stations started running differently. You could tell that Welsh was in charge. I didn't get to know Dick Welch real well, John, because I was in another building from him in the embassy.
Yeah.
I went to staff meetings and listened to him, and ironically,
And so
I had a
you were
success.
there for 2 years before Dick was assigned as the chief of station,
Exactly,
correct?
exactly,
And so
exactly.
can you talk a little bit about kind of the change when he took over before
Mhm.
versus after?
It became a more informal station, with Estes having a lot more authority. Estes was also in the separate building with me. He was sort of a chief of operations deputy. He just he just inspired you to do operations. He let you know that, and he'd keep track of you. You wanted to know what you did last night. You wanted to do what you do over the weekend. Who'd you meet? How's it going? How's your cases going? He was a hands-on. I had a branch chief, but Estes was a hands-on deputy chief of station. He wasn't some authority figure, and he was fun
Right.
to work with. He's a fun guy, a great sense of humor. And to me, Dick Welch was like, at the top. Anyway, I thought the world of him, but I didn't get to know him real well. I have
Why
in
did you
a
think
lot,
the world of him?
because of he had this authority and when he did his staff meetings, you just knew that if something went, and this is the key to our business, if something goes wrong and I make a mistake, he's not going to throw me out the door. He's going to have my back because he knows what an unpredictable, ambiguous thing operations are. It's a very unusual job, and dealing with ambiguity is the key part, and there's going to be mistakes. And
Yeah.
he wouldn't. He struck me. He never said it, but I sensed it, that he and Estes would have my back if I made a mistake, unless it was some negligence. Um, and he
Yeah.
looked like a college professor or head of the library at Yale or Harvard, but you could tell by his sense of humor, he was a street man. He was a street man. God knows Estes was. So the
Yeah.
6 months between his arrival and his murder, um, things just, I'm not going to say we started hitting grand slam home runs, but things sort of relaxed from the awful time of the 74. And just so our detractors need to know this, the embassy and the station was supported fully democracy. We got along very well with with the Caramelese government. There was no
Yeah.
anger at the CIA that the junta wasn't in charge. It's a myth. It's a myth that needs to be shattered. It's a
Yeah.
myth.
And from what I've read, it sounds like there was a lot of contention between the Greek station and the junta.
Well, contention, I didn't work the topic, so it's hard for me to say. Um, we had to meet with the junta. We were involved. We sort of had something going on in the United States called the Vietnam War. So our plate was sort of loaded with Vietnam, and other, needless to say, the Middle East, the 73 war. Greece was an important subject, but it wasn't first or second place.
Right.
Um, we just wanted the Soviets to have no success there. It's that
Yeah.
simple. They
Yeah.
were our enemy,
And
not the freaking junta. And then we got a new enemy called 17 November, who started
yeah.
killing people.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
And when
if
the junta
anybody,
took over
Mhm.
in 1967, and Georgios Papandreou, not Papandreou, Papadopoulos,
Papadopoulos,
took over and overthrew the government of Georgios Papandreou, who led the Center Union. The
Papandreou, yeah.
CIA and I think the U.S. government at large had been tracking the possibility of a coup, but was surprised when it happened. Is that right?
Again, I was in grad school. It's hard for me to
Yeah.
say.
Fair enough.
Again, our target wasn't anything to do with Greece. It was the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
That's what that station, 90% of our efforts were directed against the Soviet Union and the bloc countries, and we had to keep an eye on Turkey and Greece. We certainly
Yeah.
didn't want two allies fighting with one another.
Right.
Both allies,
And
Greece.
within that, you also didn't want it would have been important to keep Greece aligned with the West.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just look at the map, look at the geography. It's so crucial. The Mediterranean heading into the Middle East. Yeah, sure. But it was a wonder, and then that was all shattered on the 23rd of December of 75. You want me to get into the event now?
Yeah, yeah, and just before the event, when
Mm-hmm.
Dick Welch arrived as chief of station, his identity was published by both his identity and photos of his house and his address were published by an Athens newspaper.
That's right. It was published in the English language newspaper, which was called the Athens News, and it was published in the one of the Greek language papers. I think there may have been a relationship between the two papers, maybe the same, but I don't want to. I'm not really sure of that. But yes, he was publicized, which is unheard of.
Yeah,
That's the sort
and
of
I
thing.
think
That's the sort of thing you'd expect to happen in Iran. That's the sort of thing you'd expect to happen in Funyang if we had an embassy there. But unfortunately, there was a traitor to the CIA, Philip Agee. He died in 2008. He worked for the Cuban government for about 30 years, 35 years. And I emphasize he worked for the Cuban government. So if he worked for the Cuban government means that the Soviets and the East Germans, the Stasi, who were embedded with the Cubans, knew what was going on, or they used
yeah,
him and manipulated him. But he was an
yeah,
employee of the DGI, the service, and I'm sorry to say he was a
and he
traitor.
published a list of I think a
Right?
thousand CIA operatives or something. He published
Yeah,
the names of many
I've
CIA
heard that.
operatives.
I'm surprised to hear. I mean, I'm surprised that it could be 1,000, but he certainly named as
Yeah,
many
I
CIA
don't
people.
right.
And he came from Latin America, and who was in Latin America? Welsh. So Welsh's name was
Yeah,
highlighted. And
yeah,
fortunately, Dick Welch and Ron Estes decided in the summer of 75 to allow Welsh to move into the same house as his predecessors. This was a
right.
mistake. I have to be critical of this. They shouldn't have moved into the same house of their
Yeah.
predecessors, especially, and
Well,
then they should
and the
have
chief of
moved out of
station
it.
had been living in that house for 25 years.
I'm
And
sure.
just kind of note Dick Welch's warm feelings for the Greece. In Latin America, he took his personal security very seriously. In Greece, he thought Greek hospitality, nothing's going to happen. And also important to note, before his assassination, there was no uh, political violence in Greece in the post World War II era, except of course for
Civil War.
the oppression by the junta of the Greek people, and many people were arrested and tortured and murdered by the junta.
Mhm.
Um, but there was no political terrorism, there was no political assassination. So this was really his assassination was unprecedented.
Unprecedented. Also, there's a unwritten rule between intelligence services at that time, and I think still, that KGB doesn't liquidate us and we don't liquidate them. That's not what we're in this business for. We gouge the heck out of each other. We manipulate each other. Yeah, but we don't murder COSs or residents, as the
Yeah,
Soviet is called. We try to embarrass them. We cause them problems, but we don't go around killing people. But 17 November wasn't an intelligence service. It was a terrorist organization founded, and their manifests show it, Marxist-Leninism. And as I've told you separately in our prep, Marxist-Leninism, in my opinion, is the dustbin garbage can of the 20th century. There's no philosophy that is more discredited. It didn't make it into the 21st century, hope, thank God, except maybe in
Yeah.
North Korea. And I don't know anybody that wants to travel or live in North Korea. Marxist Leninism sucks. Okay. And that's what they believed
Yeah.
in. And the Greeks in the government who sort of,
And you draw a very sharp distinction between Marxist Leninism and other forms of socialism like
yes, I
social
do.
democracy and things like that. Yeah.
I do. I do. I do. I think um, continued revolution is not something that's good for society. I think we have a world of problems these days. We had a world of problems in the 70s, but Marxist Leninism was never making people feel good or putting food on their table. It was a failure. And these guys
Yeah.
believed in it, and they then went after CIA. The
And
first
it
event,
also always seems to devolve into totalitarian governments.
exactly, exactly. And um, Greece has a vibrant democracy since 75. I can't emphasize that enough. The Americans haven't gone
Yeah.
in and tried to change the government. It's all worked very well since 75 with three major parties: the New Democracy in the middle, the Syriza on the right, and the PASOK, uh, so democratic socialism on the left. Uh, it's working great, and that's the way we wanted it. And our embassy, I'm sure, is very proud of that. And people work together. Are there problems at times? Of course there are. But back to December the 23rd, 75. Welsh and his wife. He had divorced after his before his second tour in Latin America, and he married a Guatemalan lady, and they traveled to Athens together to be in the station and do representation. She's sort of, I don't want to pin this on her, but Ron and Welsh talked about living in the same house, and they sort of went with living in it because his wife, his new wife, was anxious to represent its station in the embassy, and that big house sort of was better representation. But Ralph believes, and this is
Right.
crucial, Ralph, I believe this: no matter where they would have moved, 17 November would have found them. They had the name. They could have, he was one of two people in the American embassy that had a driver. They would have been able to surveil him home, which is 10 minutes to the diplomatic enclave, and figure out where he lived. So, I yes, it was a mistake, operationally security, to move into the same house, but it wouldn't have mattered. 17 November could easily have found out who he was and where he lived. Uh, that night, cold
Yeah.
Athens night, there was no
And important to
precipitation.
note that also his driver did not have any counter surveillance training. I don't think he had any security training. The night of the assassination, Dick Welch got out of the car himself, as he always did, to unlock the gate to the house. He didn't let anyone else unlock it for him. Um, and I think Ron Estes is convinced that the address and the photos of the house and the identity of Dick Welch was leaked by Greek intelligence um, uh, to the English language newspaper. That's Ron's speculation. But also Dick Welch's name, it was published by Philip Agee in Counter Spy magazine. I think prior to that, it also came out in a book published in 1968, I think 1968, called Who's Who in the CIA. That was um, done by, I believe, an East German journalist, but given by Eastern Bloc intelligence. I don't know if it was the KGB or another service.
Yeah, East Germany was they were brilliant. Stasi was brilliant at the publishing business. They could publish in Europe in many languages, and they could hide the fact that they were involved beautifully. They were one of the best intel services in history. Stasi is also in that dustbin we talked about, garbage pail. Um, but their impact is still relevant because they've trained so many communist country intel services, including the Cubans. The Cuban Intel Service is basically the mythology of Stasi. But back to that
Yeah.
night,
Well,
uh,
the president of
Welsh,
Russia today was, I think, stationed in East Germany with the Stasi during his time with the KGB.
he was in Dresden for 10 years. He saw the protests, he saw the wall go down, and no comment on him. But back to Welsh. Yes, he was a gentleman. He opened the gate, and so the driver didn't have to get out twice. No one expected anything, and there was a Simca
Yeah.
on the street with 3 or 4 people in it. 2 of them or 3 of them got out of the car and shouted at Welsh to raise his hands. Welsh must have thought, "They want my watch. They want my wallet." Unfortunately, at a distance of about 3 feet, they shot him dead in the chest, and took off. The driver, obviously, and the wife, naturally in shock. Interestingly, and this is amazing for the story, Ron Estes was living a block away. He was he
Yeah.
was having dinner that night with his fiancée in their apartment a block away. So the driver ran up to the house and shouted at Estes at the door, "Shots fired, shots fired." Estes grabbed his gun and ran up the street and saw Welsh in a pool of blood. He literally, his moments, Welsh was held and cuddled by Ron Estes. Just think of that relationship, and I've discussed it, and it's come to this. He's holding him in his arms and cuddling him as the blood pours out. They get him in the car, in the CIA car, in Welsh's car, and head to the hospital. Estes insists that a policeman who came up, who was guarding one of the embassies, take Mrs. Welsh and drive her to the hospital. He didn't want Mrs. Welsh to suffer the last seconds of her husband's life and all the blood. So they ended up at
Yeah.
the hospital, and the rest is history. 3 days later, they headed out to the son of Welsh, Tim Welsh, who I think was 22 or 3 at the time, was the first lieutenant in the Marine Corps, was redeployed. They reached him, and he came back to Greece to accompany his father's casket on a C-130. Talk about courage. Talk about strength. Sitting in a
Yeah.
C-130,
And
over the
his
C-130.
father was living in Greece at the time, I think, with Welch. His father moved there for the posting.
Oh, yeah, Welsh
Um,
is, yeah, Patrick,
but
known as the Colonel,
yeah,
known
yeah,
as the Colonel. The Colonel was on the
yeah,
2nd floor,
yeah,
and, her Colonel heard nothing. Interestingly, somehow, the 17 November, if Welsh had been sharp enough, the light over the driveway was not, gone. I don't know how they did something to get there was nobody else in the house. The lady,
yeah,
the housekeeper, had gone home much earlier, so it was just Patrick on the 2nd floor, the Colonel, sleeping, and, Estes, rushed to the embassy. They called all of us into the embassy, they made different calls, uh, sort of a daisy chain calls, and we met with Estes. He gave us the news. He was sending flash messages. We don't send flash messages very often. They were all flash about the death of his, close friend and chief.
yeah.
Um, I can imagine the
And I
shock,
just
and
want to note one fact that stood out to me was Ron Estes was a veteran of the Korean War, and he himself was injured in the Korean War and would have received the Purple Heart, but he actually declined the Purple Heart because he didn't want his parents to worry, to be notified that he had been injured. Um,
sounds
but
like
yeah, and he was recruited by the CIA, I think, shortly after his service in Korea. But he knew from probably looking at the injuries, but I think the smell of the blood itself, the smell from the wound, that Dick Welch wasn't going to survive.
Yes, he remembered from Korean War. Great research by you, John. Great research, and heartbreaking research. Heartbreaking
Yeah,
research. It shouldn't have happened.
yeah,
It shouldn't have happened, and of course, it was a cowardly act. I mean, put up your dukes. Let's have a duel.
Yeah.
No, let's go to war. No, no, just blasted him away. It just doesn't get more cowardly, which is another aspect of Marxist-Leninism. Um, Back
Yeah.
to the 27th, and I think was the day the plane. I was living in northern Athens in Anavula, and I knew that the casket was going to be out at the airport. At that time, our Air Force was still involved. They had a little base there, and they were involved with the airport. They shared the same runways as the commercial airlines, and so I decided to throw my son Nick into the car. He was 7 years old, and we drove over to the airbase, and incredibly, just shows you how different it was. We just drove right into the airport, onto the tarmac, to the plane. We were like 30 meters away from the plane as we witnessed the flag on the casket, and the keep chief, the intel service chief, was there with Ron, and Ron collapsed. He hadn't slept in 3 days, and he collapsed into the arms of the keep chief from exhaustion. And the body and it went off to, not to Dover, it went to Andrews Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And the son had to sit on that plane the whole time. My son still remembers that event, and that's sort of that event. Witnessing that to today, talking to you is a continuum that sort of inspires me or motivates me to highlight the life and career of these two guys, particularly Mr. Welsh,
Yeah.
who lost his life. By the way, I remember Estes telling me, I said, he knew that me and my family would go back to Athens every year or two to a certain island, Naxos, and have a great time with the grandkids. And he knew that. And I said to him once, I said, Ron, how often have you gone back to Athens with Luba? And he looked at me and he said, I never have. That's significant. That's a Marine showing you how sensitive he is, because almost all Greek State Department, CIA, Homeland Security, anyone who's ever served in Greece can't wait to go back, go to the islands,
Yeah.
go to the
Yeah.
museums,
Yeah.
and eat feta cheese and eat tiropitas and have a ball. It's one of the great tourist destinations of the world. You know that.
Yeah.
You've
Just
lived.
an
You
incredible
were in
country.
Crete, weren't you? Yeah, you were in Crete.
Yeah, I was.
And
Yeah.
such wonderful people. Their music, their poetry, their history. They started democracy. It's all good except for 17 November. And
Yeah. Yeah.
the funeral was held.
And I want to come
Sure.
back to kind of the immediate aftermath of his assassination, but you talked about his body being flown home to what is now Joint Base Andrews, um, and I think at the time was Andrews Air Force Base. Um, his father, colonel in the Army, asked Ron Estes if Dick Welch could be buried at Arlington Cemetery. And until this time, no non Dick Welch has never served as an active duty member of the armed forces. No one who wasn't a veteran of the armed forces was buried in Arlington Cemetery. So the request went to Gerald Ford, who immediately approved it. And I think Dick Welch's kids insisted that the headstone read Central Intelligence Agency.
Correct.
And I think that's the only headstone in Arlington Cemetery that says Central Intelligence Agency on it. Is that right?
Exactly. Like I've seen CIA headstones, they say patriot, they say loyal American. No, I've never seen one, and I doubt there is one that highlights CIA, because you don't do that. The family and those three kids, you have a 22-year-old. Let's say he was 23. You have a 23-year-old, you have a 21-year-old, and you have a 17-year-old, and they're making a decision like that. God bless them. And I'm so proud of what they did. And I'm gonna. I've been to that gravesite a few times, and see Central Intelligence Agency, not CIA. It's written Central Intelligence. I've sent you some photos of it. The family goes back every Christmas and puts flowers at the grave. And I think I mentioned to you that the father is just 2 rows behind,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Estes is in a columbarium. His ashes are maybe, I don't want to, 100 meters away. So the
Yeah.
three of them. Yes, the Estes went to the house on the 24th morning to tell the father the news. He hadn't slept all night. He was sitting there, and Estes said there was a shooting last night outside, and Mr. Welch Colonel Welch wanted to know any fatalities, and he said yes. Dick's gone, and the colonel composed himself immediately and said to Ron, can you promise me you'll try to get him buried in Arlington? And Ron, writing to headquarters, who then contacted the White House, got it done. I'm going to say this: there's some controversy. Can't tell a story without some controversy. There,
No, we can't. No, we can't. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Particularly, I think it was the New York Times or the Post, one or the other, or both, were angry that the CIA was able to have this burial done at Arlington, because they said the CIA, which was embroiled in its mess with Congress at the time, the
Right.
Pike
This
Committee
was
and the
the direct
Committee.
aftermath of the
Yeah,
Church Committee.
yeah,
The CIA was in
yeah,
uh, held in low esteem, I think, in the
yep.
country, relatively speaking. And also at the time of Dick Welch's assassination, George Bush had been selected to succeed Bill Colby and was going through a tumultuous confirmation process.
Good points. Good points. And the fact, let's face it, the agency had been down for the 8 count. It was reeling. And some of the newspapers, the Post and the Times, were upset that, that the only reason why they buried him in Arlington was so they could get some good PR. That's just cruel. That's just cruel. The agency rebounded. In fact, for those who think the agency rebounded and started doing bad things again, within a year, Jimmy Carter had won the presidency. Within a year, Jimmy Carter had appointed Stansfield Turner to be the director, and he cleaned house. The famous, I forget the number of case officers that were retired. So, yeah, the agency didn't do this. No, he deserves to be in Arlington Cemetery. There's been others since then that have been in Arlington Cemetery without military careers. Um, back to the funeral. It was an awful day. It was an awful day, cold and overcast. Henry Kissinger was there. Colby was there. Ford was there. Mrs. Welch was there. The former ex-Mrs. Welch was there. The children were there, and a lot of CIA people, of course. Naturally, back to
Yeah.
Stasi. They seem to be having a supporting role here. Stasi was up in an apartment they rented for the day, or a hotel room, taking pictures of the car's license plates so they could identify CIA officers. Thing that really bugs me, and I want to see how you feel about this, John. The Greek embassy. Remember, now we're
Right.
a year and a half into democracy. The ambassador in Washington, high-level Greek ambassador from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, didn't attend the funeral. They sent no
That's
representative
right.
from the Greek embassy. That hurts. Again, this isn't
Yeah.
Iran. This isn't Yemen. This is a Greek, the success of Greek Americans, Greece in general, the birthplace of democracy, and they can't send a representative to the funeral. The heck,
Yeah, and they're Greece is a founding member of NATO. They're a NATO
of
ally
course.
with deep partnership with the United States, and so somewhat baffling, I think, that there was no representative.
I don't expect, like Kennedy's funeral, where heads of state from Great Britain and France and Germany attend. No, but send a representative from the embassy. Who should have been there was the foreign minister. The foreign minister of Greece should have traveled, business class. He should have traveled, or I'm sure it was a he at that time, to attend that funeral. No representative from Greece. That hurts. That hurts, and bad on them. Shame on them. So there we go. I think that's the whole
Yeah, and
story
then
on.
I want to go back
Mhm.
to the immediate aftermath of the assassination. So at
Sure.
this point, no one knows who 17 November is, and no one knows that it's 17 November that has murdered Dick Welch. And so I think first suspicion falls on, well, someone in the station, I think a junior case officer, goes to the armory, grabs a pistol, and wants to go shoot the KGB resident.
I know that gentleman. He's still alive and close friend of mine. And yeah, it wasn't he. Three guys. He wasn't a big guy, but three guys had to hold him down. He was really angry, and yeah, we could have had. Yeah, that would have been awful.
Yeah.
But
And I
he
think
was just
Ron Estes thought that was not a good idea.
no, Ron, who loved the guy, was one of his closest friends. Yeah, that didn't. He was just upset, and yeah.
Of course.
But the manifesto of 17 November came, I think, after the first of the year in early 75. Interestingly, we're going to talk about the life of 17 November until its downfall in 2001. You know, what's interesting
Yeah.
is
But
they never
even
targeted.
before
They
that,
never.
then there was an AOKA member, I think, was in Athens, flew out of Athens that night or the next night. And initial suspicion falls on that person as the murderer of Dick Welch. And I think Ron Estes, who was stationed in Cyprus, had deep connections with AOKA. And so first that lead was ran to ground. Is that correct?
Yes, that lead was run the ground by, interestingly, the same guy who was close to Ron, Ron sent him to Nicosia to meet the Ayoka member to determine whether there was and that officer showed a lot of courage in having that meeting. When you know you're going to a meeting and the guy you're meeting could be the shooter, and
Yeah.
but it was a false lead, but it was an example of the courage of a station officer. And yeah, Estes, obviously you've listened to his podcast on with
Yeah.
Affio,
With Affio.
and
Yep.
I commend the viewers of this to take a look at Estes' Affio interview, which I think was about 3 years ago. I was sitting beside him. You can't see me literally holding his hand because I didn't think he'd make it through the interview, and how wrong I was. Once a Marine, always a Marine. He was brilliant. He was
Yeah.
brilliant. It's a brilliant interview. Of the
Yeah. And
brilliant
I'll
guy.
put a link to that interview in the show notes.
That would be great. And I'm just sorry that he can't be with us here, John. You would have enjoyed knowing him. And it's a big character, and um, just a wonderful guy. So we now have 17 November. I forget exactly. Their second victim was a Greek police officer who was accused of terrorism. So 17 November
Right.
put some bullets in him rather than arrest him or have him arrested. The new government would have had him arrested. No, they, Marxist-Lenin believes in quick trials, so they, uh, and that led to another 24 victims over a span of 27 years. And of course,
Yeah.
you've heard
And
me.
it was after that second murder, I think they 17 November took responsibility for the murder of the police officer, and I think that was almost a year after
I think it was
Dick
about a year.
Welch's assassination.
Right.
And they also claimed responsibility for Dick Welch's murder the previous year, and only then does, I think, the Greek government start to believe that there's this group 17, start to take the group seriously.
Well, I'm not sure if they ever took it seriously, but that's me being rude.
Well, fair point.
They
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point.
Well, interestingly, we, the station members, a good question is, how did we react? Because we had never had counter surveillance training. Um, we were in Greece where nothing like that ever happened. So we started looking over our shoulders and out of our rearview mirrors. And I was
You
worried, and
didn't have counter surveillance training as just part of your
because we had
training
surveillance
at
training.
the CIA
If you
training facility.
if you went to a communist country, bloc
Yeah.
country, you had full surveillance and counter surveillance. We had minimal, and now that changed.
Okay.
I'll tell you that. Another thing that changed, thanks to 17 November, is, and Philip Agee mainly was what's the exact term? The law was passed, I think, in '82 that if you ever
Right.
gave out the name of CIA officers, you were going to be prosecuted. And
Yeah.
that's
It's
happened a few times. We won't get into those stories since they involve a former vice president, not vice president, sorry, deputy State Department, deputy chief of the State Department, not a cancel that former vice president. No, not made a mistake. It's the deputy.
I think are you referring to Valerie Plame here?
I sure am. You can. I'll let you say it. I'm not going to say it. And she was
Okay,
outed.
yeah. Oh well, I it's a convoluted story, but I think Scooter Libby, who was Vice President Dick Cheney at the time, his chief of staff, leaked the name of Valerie Plame, to, I think it was I forget the name of the journalist. He's passed away, but leaked his name to her name to a journalist in retaliation for her husband Joe Wilson publishing an op-ed in the New York Times refuting the claim that yellow cake uranium, I think, was being smuggled or by I think, was it the Nigerians? No, not the a
I
nation in
think
Africa, I
Niger.
forget, to
Niger. Yeah.
Niger. Yeah. It was Niger. Uh, that they were smuggling yellow cake uranium to Iraq. It's a claim that was debunked, but it was a key piece of the administration's case for the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah. I never met Valerie Plame and Palm, but I only heard good things about her. I'm sure she was an excellent officer. I think she's still with us, thank the Lord. But I've never met her. Very unsavory story. Uh, that hurt. I hope she's well. Um, Back to the post. So we were
And
very
so in
careful.
1982, the Intelligence Identities Protection Act was
There you
passed.
go. Yeah,
And that
that's
was,
that.
yeah.
No, and that's due to these events we're talking about. Um, Interestingly, uh, the 17 November killed two naval. I think one was naval attaché and the other was Air Force attaché, or are they both naval? Um, Santos and
I think you're right. I think it was two Navy captains, I
yeah,
believe.
Santos and Nordine.
And yeah, and I think also an Air Force or Army sergeant,
Sergeant who
is that
worked
right,
at the
was
base.
killed.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Those are the
yeah,
Americans. Those are the four Americans, and um, just awful. I remember being in South America when they assassinated Santos, and who was a Greek American attaché. Later, Nordine, and then Stewart was the Air Force sergeant.
that's right.
Just
That's right.
and very, very, very successful terrorist group. And we need to emphasize, it's one of my emphasis points, that 16 Greeks were also slaughtered, murdered, blown apart by IEDs, bullets. 16 Greek citizens. If you want to think of something that should inspire a law enforcement agency or a intelligence service to get fired up and go after the bastards, you would think 16 citizens would do the trick. It didn't. They never made a strong effort to bring down 17 November. And I will
Yeah,
argue that
yeah.
whoever wants to argue with me, they never made a compelling effort. They went through we formed a task force with them. We were represented, we being U.S. government, by the FBI, one of the best in the world, by the CIA, by Counterterrorism Center, and their two services. Their Greek police, city police, law enforcement, and their intel service, KEEP, and it got nowhere. And there
Yeah.
was good efforts on our parts. I was involved in some of it, and it's just an amazing story that these 23 members of 17 November were walking the streets of Athens. They weren't in a cave in Afghanistan. They weren't in the Sudan playing in the sand. They were walking the streets in true name in suburban or downtown Athens. It's an amazing agency gets accused of intelligence failures. Well, I'm accusing the Greek services of a law enforcement failure. It's a classic,
Yeah.
and
Well, in one of
team.
the articles you sent me, the E. Wayne Mary, who was the deputy political counselor to the Athens embassy from 1987 to 1990, he was talking to a police officer, a high-ranking police officer, said in private, quote, "Look, we're not Sherlock Holmes here, but we're not idiots. We can catch these bastards, but we're handcuffed." The officer added, "The political leaders don't want us to get these guys. The only way we're ever going to get these bastards is if you Americans get our political orders changed. We're not complete idiots here. We can do the job if we're given an opportunity." And
Amazing.
you're also quoted in this article. Yeah.
Me.
So
Okay.
that's, and then the victims of 17 November were Greek politicians, Greek police officers. Some of the people who were killed are linked to, I think, torture and oppression of Greek citizens during the junta. But this is, terrorism. And I think also Greek industrials were murdered by the group, industrialists. And they, I think correct me if I'm wrong here, but the political climate in which 17 November is operating is, there is huge suspicion and resentment from the Greek junta, and they are almost seen as folk heroes, I think.
Pretty sad. Yeah, Robin Hood, they ain't. Sorry.
Right.
No.
Right.
No.
But then the Olympics is coming to Athens in 2004, and there's an incident in 2002 at the port of Piraeus, and maybe you want to talk about that.
Yes, before I talk about it, you had your thing you read. Can I read? It's 3 paragraphs.
Please.
From one of our officers who I happen to know personally, a lot younger than I am, but he's long retired. He's been retired for years. He was in Athens for 3 years during the 90s, and a very honest, integrity-filled guy. And this is what he wrote. Unsure if you are interested, Ralph, in the below for your use below. It is not my view. I never worked with Greek authorities. It's from a former colleague who was in Athens in the 90s. And this is the verbatim. I worked 17 November matters in the early 90s. I was in country for 2 years. I also knew individuals who had been involved with the issue since 1975. And I read literally all the files that existed on the group. It is my experience that the Greek government did not want to pursue the investigation of the group. They wanted the issue to go away. They had no appetite for running down the individuals involved because they knew they would find connections between the terrorists killing people in Athens and the prominent Greek politicians. They all came out of the same milieu. On one occasion, while I was there in the embassy, an attack occurred in downtown Athens. It was in Kolonaki Square. I think it was one of the attachés. That's my opinion. But one of the guys from the embassy decided he would walk to Kolonaki Square, knowing there would be a lot of traffic. Probably I've done the same walk, probably a 15-minute walk, 20 minutes maybe, to see the investigation and how it was going at the site of the murder. He assumed the investigation would still be in progress. He returned about an hour later to the embassy saying he must have gotten the wrong address. When he checked the information given to him, he found he had gone to the right place, but that the crime scene had been cleaned and released before he got there. So the crime scene for an assassination in a crowded downtown area, sort of their Times Square, the crime scene was cleaned within an hour of the attack. This was not unusual. This was the norm. Physical evidence covered from attack sites, even when collected, was never investigated. No one attempted to determine where the components from explosive devices were purchased. No one attempted to find the source of explosives being used. Individuals coming forward offering information on 17 November were frequently ignored or turned away. For most of the time, the 17 November operated, there was no Greek investigation of the attacks or an effort to bring those responsible to justice. The Greek government simply looked the other way. Does this mean the Greek government pulled the trigger? Of course not. Of course not. The triggers were and the bombs were set by Marxist-Leninist terrorist bastards. The Greek government didn't kill anybody, but they certainly didn't make much of an effort to get the bad guys, and they got to live with that. They got to live with that. Back to the
2002.
next, I guess, is the event, as you pointed out, at Piraeus. One of the Greek bomb makers put together a nice bomb and was walking with a backpack in Piraeus Harbor, in Piraeus Port. Obviously, he wouldn't have had the bomb in his backpack unless he was intending to use it. But we'll never know who his target was because the bomb accidentally went off, took off his hand, and tore open the backpack. And he ran off. All he lost was his hand. His legs were good. He ran off and wasn't captured by police there or anything. And thus started the investigation. This would have been in late 2001, I believe, or sometime in 2001.
I think it
So
was
the
in
Greeks
2002.
too. So the Greeks had themselves
Yeah.
a backpack. And they had themselves a bomb. And they had themselves in less than 3 years, they had the Olympics coming up. And the last thing they needed for the Olympics was Americans or foreigners or Greeks being assassinated with bombs. That would have cut into the attendance. So they really made an effort to do something with this backpack and they found inside, John, an ID card. Good old ID card. It was burned. It was basically disfigured, but they had something. Couldn't read the name, unfortunately. So what they decided to do, the Minister of Public Order, I think his name was Philotimo, he's a hero here. Philotimo decides, hey, let's take this ID card and give it to one of the newspapers to put in the newspaper. So they went to Tovima, which was a daily, I don't know if it's still around, and they published a newspaper, and they said, if anybody recognizes this face, even though it's disfigured, please go to your nearest police station and report it. So wouldn't you know it, in Piraeus, a few blocks from the port, I have to be careful, politically correct here, two little old persons, really two little old ladies, really two little old yayas. Yaya is the nonna. We have nonna in Italian. They have yaya. Two yayas were sitting drinking their coffee, looking at Tovima, and sure enough, they looked at this photograph, and one said to the other, we know him. That's Savas. He lives on the 3rd floor. So luckily, they didn't try to take action themselves. They went around the corner to their police precinct, and they walked in with the newspaper, and they said, we know this guy. He lives in our building. The police are like, oh, my God. So two policemen and then two yayas, and one of the yayas I think she helped with the superintendent work at the building, so she had a key. They went to this is where he lives. And they opened the door. He wasn't there, but guess what they found in there? Explosives, timers, wiring, pamphlets, propaganda. A lot of 17 November flags, their symbolic flag. And sure enough, when the gentleman came home, Savas, he was arrested. And that changed everything because they ended up working him feverishly to get the names of everybody else. And what happened was, this is another thing that bugs me. I've talked about it with you, and I think you're bugged by it. The Greek service and the law enforcement never allowed the embassy people, the task force, to have any interview time with any of the 17 November detainees. They were off limits. They wouldn't allow us with one of them, even with one of the Greeks present, to witness the interview. That's unbelievable between allies. Really unbelievable. So this guy Savas wasn't talking. So the Greeks came up with the idea because in talking to him, they know that he feared one thing. Remember, we're talking 2002, 2003. He feared being put on an airplane and taken to Guantanamo, to Gitmo. He didn't want to be in the hands of Americans because he had all these wild thoughts. So
Yeah.
they went to our task force. In fact, the same officer I talked to you about earlier, he was back there as a contractor. They went to, and they said, look, we need to throw the fear of God into this guy. Why don't you Americans see if you can find a uniform, one of those orange uniforms, John, and get it sent here, and we'll use it to throw fear into the guy. So sure enough, they wrote a little message to Guantanamo. I happened to be there and working, and sure enough, I was able to send them an orange uniform. And sure enough, the Greek authorities, they're members of their task force, took the uniform to the bomb maker and said, here it is. Let's see if it fits. And he panicked and he gave up the names. Still, even though we provided the help on the ploy, still never got a chance to talk with any of those guys. And to this day,
Yeah.
only 4 of the 17 who were convicted and tried, only 4 of them are still left in jail. They're basically treated as if they did bank fraud or, you know,
Right. And important to note that for Dick Welch, in Greece there's a 20-year statute of limitations on
how
murder,
sad,
which had expired by the time that the members of 17 November were brought to trial.
how sad, how sad. And so the Welsh family, the 3 children were there.
Yeah.
The trial was like a circus. You can look at photos in the Wall Street Journal. It looks like somebody meeting for an auction. Not a Sotheby's auction, an auction of cows or horses or something. It's a joke. It's literally a joke. And
Yeah.
they wouldn't let the Welsh children, even because of the statute of limitations, John, they wouldn't let the Welsh children do a victim statement, an
Right.
eloquent victim statement. The only person who was
And I think
allowed
I
to
think
do
they were being openly taunted by members of 17 November in the
that's
courtroom.
right.
And
Especially Nicole Sanders, God bless her. Her father was a sergeant. She was allowed to do, because his was a recent, within the 20 years. She was allowed to do a victim statement. And while she was doing
yeah.
her victim statement, she was being taunted and made fun of. Molly Welsh was told when there was a lull in the trial and they went outside, a lady walks by and tells Molly Welsh, your father got what he deserved. That's the sort of thing that went on at the trial. One thing I wanted to say, because I was pretty critical, and I know you are too, of the Greek services techniques, their inability. Um, we got one thing that has to be known, and it's not a secret. Since 1952, the FBI Academy in Quantico holds, I don't know how many times a year, maybe twice a year. I don't want to make this stuff up, but they have an academy training. One of their training courses is geared to training overseas law enforcement, the FBIs of Nigeria, the FBIs of Kenya, the FBIs of Germany. They bring in groups, maybe each year. I'm making this up. The Greeks get 3 billets, and they send 3 officers to have this training. And the training is serious stuff. Forensics, all the modern techniques. And since 52, that's been going on. Also, Interpol. Greeks are members of Interpol. They would get training there. I'm sure they've talked to Scotland Yard, who gives training. So there's no excuse that, oh, well, they didn't know the techniques and they were living in the 1920s. No, they knew the techniques. They had the methodologies. They just didn't employ them. That's sort of my story,
Right.
John.
Yeah. It sounds like just the political will wasn't there
Yeah.
from their superiors. Um, yeah. Well, then there are also stories about, to your point, the investigation is cleaned up in an hour. And then there are other stories about police officers giving spent shell casings from crime scenes to their journalist friends, including
Yeah.
for, very high profile cases. So there's all that. I want to go back now
Yes.
to the period surrounding the assassination, and talk about both the political climate, but also the personal climate for you. And I really want to dig into why this became a mission for you, and how it's just impacted your career and your life going forward. But there's one story I want to tell, which is so during the Greek junta, Georgios Papandreou, not Papandreou, excuse me, Papadopoulos is the head of the junta um, to start. And I think also important to note that the many members of the junta come from what were called the security battalions during the Axis occupation of Greece during World War II. And so these are men who are fascists. They have taken oaths of fealty and allegiance to Adolf Hitler, the Fuhrer. Um, and, and so these are the people who are operating the junta. But during that time, I think Papadopoulos starts some measures to liberalize the dictatorship in some way. And his subordinate, Demetrios Ioannidis, not sure if I'm getting the pronunciation right there, does not like this at all and launches a very quick, bloodless coup against Papadopoulos and takes over the last 2 years of, is it the last 2 years of the junta? Um, and he is the man who wants to take over Cyprus, which ultimately ends up being resulting in the downfall of the military junta. But I think there's a story that Ron Estes tells where he is at a cocktail party with Ioannidis and confronts him about his plans to um, invade Cyprus, and I think advised against this. And he asked Ioannidis what happens if the Turks get involved, and I think Ioannidis says, "Oh, I'll be in Istanbul in 3 days," and Ron Estes, I think, retorts that you'll be in Istanbul in 3 days as a prisoner of war.
Yeah, Ioannidis
So, can you talk a
went.
little bit about the relationship between the CIA and the junta? Because I think just important to talk about how the junta was the government that came to power. This was, it seems to be Greek internal politics and not endorsed or desired by the United States.
That's for sure. Estes tells a story in his memoir, family memoir. He tells a story on a couple of podcasts that I organized, and yeah, he's the senior representative of the station at that point, and of course a Greek speaker. And I think the Ioannidis Ministry of Defense called him in to have a discussion, and they discussed what would happen if blah blah blah. And Estes gave them a firm answer. That's what I have again. That's the story that I say goes against this business of we gave them the green light. You don't, guys like Ron Estes in embassies don't give the green light. The green light is given in Washington if you send a head of state or national security advisor or the head of keep to Washington for meetings. They're going to meet with the national security advisor. And they may even meet with the president. In this case, no. But you go for higher ups. GS 15s and 16s don't decide giving green lights for countries to go to war. I think there was something similar to this during the first Iraqi war, where our ambassador had a discussion with Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein interpreted what she said that the Americans were okay for them to go into Kuwait, and of course, that's not what happened. But that at least was the U.S. ambassador to the head of state, and a mistake was made by Saddam Hussein, and he paid for it. In this case, Ron Estes was the deputy of the CIA office. He's not going to give green lights. Plus, he's too smart. He's a brilliant political scientist, or was
Yeah.
geopolitical scientist. No one in the station, we had Greek speakers there, and if the Greeks would take the word of a GS-16 instead of going to proper, it's just ridiculous. It's a scapegoating, and we paid for it with the death of Richard Welch. Who's responsible
Yeah.
for the death of Richard Welch? The junta. Did I say that loud and clear enough? I hope so. The junta.
Yeah.
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 It wasn't the
Yeah.
CIA. It wasn't a Turkish deputy minister of foreign affairs. It was the junta, because they were humiliated in June of 74. And a lot of people paid with their lives. Greeks, too.
Yeah. And they worked very hard to scapegoat the CIA and the United States for the
Right.
failure in Cyprus.
Right. And I guess you could say they succeeded, because
Yeah.
17 November
And
was,
just
and of course, one last thing.
the reason I really
Is
I just want to highlight this is because
Yeah.
we live in a time when conspiracies proliferate. It's easy to believe this stuff, and there are examples of real uh, coups that are backed by the CIA, like in Iran, in South America. But in Greece, that was not the case. And I think it's just really important to be very careful and do homework to understand power and systems and how history unfolds.
Well stated. I mean, if you look at the CIA, try to look at it from outside the CIA. With the Bay of Pigs, which was a coup attempt in a sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that was the purpose of the porpoise. Uh, after the um, Bay of
Well,
Pigs,
more of an invasion attempt, I think.
yeah.
To
Oh,
be fair.
sure. But I mean,
Yeah.
but after that, you have no examples of us overturning governments. In the 50s, it was a whole different milieu. It was a whole different environment. Um, uh, yeah, and I think we stayed out of that stuff. But you see, the Greek media wanted to believe we were still doing it, still trying to overthrow people. We weren't. There's just no evidence of any such thing happening. I guess 61 was the Bay of Pigs. 63 was the Vietnam DM regime falling, and
60. Yeah. I think that was exactly 3 weeks before Kennedy's
Kennedy was shot.
assassination.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and the story is that not the CIA, but that Ambassador
Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. Yeah.
Goodwin, yep, ran for president, and was yeah, and he was ambassador, and he gave a thumbs up not to do it, but that we wouldn't do anything about it. That's the closest we get, and that had nothing to do with the CIA. So I guess I'm
Right.
being
Well,
defensive.
actually, and I think the cable, yeah, Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. And so Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. was lobbying for the overthrow of DM, and he was doing that against the advice of Bill Colby, who I think was at the time of Dick Welch's assassination was the director of CIA, but at the
Right,
time of the coup against DM, I believe was head of covert operations in
he was.
Southeast Asia.
Phoenix program.
Yeah.
It would have been 12 years earlier, and he voted. He opined that it was a mistake. But those are, I'm sorry, the 70s. There's no overthrows of governments. We're just trying to get out of
Right.
Vietnam. We're trying to get out of Vietnam. We're trying to Europe. You know, another thing we talked about the 17 November and how long it took to bring them down. Look, compare that to the Baader Meinhof, compare it to the Weatherman, compare it to what was the Italian one? Oh
The
gosh,
Red Brigade? No, not
Red
the Red
Brigade.
Brigade.
Thank you, the Red Brigade.
Is it the Red Brigade?
They didn't last for 27 years.
Yeah.
There has to be a political will, John. There was none.
Yeah. Well,
But
and in the case of the Red Brigade in Italy, I think the U.S. was deeply involved in that, and I think that the intelligence support activity was involved in that.
mhm. but I don't mean to make this like an FBI um,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
CIA investigative story. The main thing you wanted, and I want to stress it, is the honor, the integrity, the intellect of this special CIA officer, Richard Welch.
Very
He
much so.
he wasn't
Yeah.
just another GS-15 or another Category B ops officer. He was on his way to being on the seventh floor and at least being the DDO. And I say that with full confidence. Of course, it's subjective. Of course, it never happened. It wasn't allowed to happen. But he was definitely being groomed, not because he was a brown nose, not because he was a suck up, because he was a outstanding officer and leader. And he was right beside him was Ron Estes, who had the same characteristics. But Welsh stands above all, and he gave his
Yeah.
life for the country. And here we are at 50 years. It seems incredible. It seems incredible.
And you went on to have your own illustrious career post this
I wouldn't.
assassination. But
Yeah,
obviously your time in Greece was formative to you as an officer, but also you as just a man and a human. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of take us into your insight. This has looking back over your career, it's this incident that has captured your attention and become a mission for you. And I'm just wondering, why is it so moving to you? Why does it stand out so much compared to the rest of your career?
good question. I would take you back to 2014, I think it was, or 15, where I had I'd already been a contractor for 15 years, but one of our Center for Studies of Intelligence, CSI, we call it, basically our history staff. One of their they had interview they did when they could they'd bring in former officers for oral histories, and I was brought in to CSI by a friend, a close family friend who was working as a contractor for CSI, and he said, "Ralph, I'd like to do an oral history of your career." I said, "Sure." Really good guy, and we did it. Well, by coincidence, he had served in Athens also in the 70s, so he was sort of geared up to talk about Welsh and what had happened. He was there. So we had a part of my oral history, which is classified. We talk, this fellow and I talk about Welsh and the inability of the Greeks to bring down 17 November. And we're sort of like bantering back and forth and jabbing one another. How could this happen? And he said to me, he said, "Ralph, you ought to do something. You ought to publicize this, or you should saying it here on our oral history is never going to go anywhere." So I decided, based on his encouragement, we'll say, to try to do something about it. And I have a whole, I wish I had kept better folders and contact reports and all that stuff, but I have over here to my right is a whole pile of stuff. Um, and I started by contacting journalists who I only read nonfiction, who I had read, and maybe they'd be interested. Magazines like the Atlantic, and just, but it all goes into a black hole unless you have a lead. I mean, our mutual friend. If I didn't have we had the mutual friend, I wouldn't be talking to you this morning. He's
That's
another
right.
story. I love him to death. So
Yeah.
I made this effort and never got anywhere. Didn't get anywhere, and it was frustrating. I talked to people from the New York Times. I talked to people from the Post. But I never had any good referrals. Finally, I was in Salt Lake City doing some contract work. I ran into a former officer who worked for me, a lady who worked with me in the Philippines, and I told her the story and how frustrated I was, and she said, "I'll help you." I'm like, "What?" Turned out she was a part-time professor at Georgetown, and we hired a Georgetown graduate to do research and write a draft of an article that we would give to AFIO. You know AFIO, Association of Former
Yeah.
Intelligence Officers. I commend your listeners to listen to AFIO or get involved with AFIO. It's a great organization and very substantive. It isn't about cocktail parties or coffee clutches. It's a real
Hmm.
substantive group of people. And I think it's about 75% CIA and the rest are Homeland Security or FBI or something. And anyway, so we got the work done. I had a team of 5 of us paying the expenses for the research, paying. I had to fly the person to St. Augustine to spend 6 hours with Ron Estes. We had different other. Not complaining about the expenses, but I had a little team of board members, we'll call them, helping
Yeah.
me, and that appeared, that magazine article which you've made reference to. Sorry, it's not a magazine; it's a journal. Appeared in February of 2021, and I thought, my God, I did it. It's a victory. We got an article on Richard Welch, a positive article that covered most of what we have just talked about. It was a very well written article. Um, and then I started making efforts to do other stuff. And I knew that 2025 would be a target year because it'd be the 50th anniversary. But
Yeah.
subsequent to the AFIO article, we've had an article in the Greek American, all positive, Greek American newspaper called the National Herald. They did an editorial on me, 50,000 readership. They did an editorial on me. They did an article about Welsh and the event. Then we had the Providence, Rhode Island uh, Providence Journal, which is the oldest newspaper in the United States, did a beautiful article on the 6th of June. Then on the same day at the agency when they did their memorial for the star honorees, there was a ceremony and Mr. Welsh was honored, and they named the conference room of the EUR Mission Center in Welsh's name with a plaque and photographs. I did a spy museum podcast. I'm not telling you all this to brag on myself. I'm telling you so you know that the whole project is encompassed, and now we have you helping me out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No,
but
absolutely.
but there was the spy museum podcast in late July. The CIA
Which is also a
retired.
great interview.
Yeah, thank you. Um, CIA alumni group has published an article, as has the other CIA called CIRA retiree group, another article. And culminating, John Coleman is helping me today. And in a few days, the Washington Post is going to publish an article on the 50th anniversary event. So that probably, another podcast is coming out in January. I did it in late November, but it takes 5 weeks by one of your colleagues, competitors. So I feel like I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. It means a lot to me. And I have friends that have helped me. I have a little kitchen cabinet made up of advisors, because I make mistakes, and so it's a team effort. And of course, I've become extremely close to the Welsh and Estes families, and they're
Yeah.
marvelous. Uh,
Yeah.
and they love each other. You see, after it happened, the Estes family brought in the Welsh children and helped them, especially the young daughter Molly. We have a relationship. It just didn't know, they didn't hug each other and condolences. No, they took care of Molly and did things with her and remained friends. The two families remain friends to this day. So
Yeah.
the Estes Welsh part of it continues. Uh,
Yeah. And Ron Estes went on to have his own illustrious career, and I think finished his career as chief of station in Madrid.
No,
But
he
this
was in Madrid, but he also finished. He was a division chief in the headquarters in the late '90s twice. He was a division chief,
okay, okay.
and then he
I
retired to go
apologize.
into private business as a consultant. I went into I didn't go I went into business as a contractor, working with the military, and I worked with Counterterrorism Center until 216, and I'm still hanging in there. I want you to know, Friday I had my eye exam. I can still see. The optometrist gave me a
Unlike Dick
yeah.
Welch.
Listen,
Yeah.
at my age, when the optometrist says you're doing good, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I
Well,
missed.
okay. You mentioned your
But
eye
John,
exam.
one last
I
thing.
don't think we talked about this, but can we tell the story of Dick Welch defrauding his eye exam to join the CIA?
I'm going to let you tell that one because you're on top of it better than I am, and I'll comment
Okay.
on
Well,
it.
I don't know, but I don't think that's true. But I think that the eye exam, the entrance exam to get into the CIA in the 50s, was reading a passage. I think it might have been from the Iliad or something. It was from, I forget what it was from, but basically reading a Greek passage. And naturally, Dick Welch already had this passage memorized from his
High
studies in
school.
classics at Harvard. Yeah.
Yeah, in high school.
And so when he had to cover his good eye and only had the eye that was blind, he was able to recite the passage from memory and pass his exam.
Well, you got it perfect. And here's the thing. That's a good example of a case officer being a good case officer even before he became a case officer.
That's
He
right.
showed
That's
the
right.
attributes of dealing with ambiguity and thinking on your feet with that exam. I'm so glad he joined the CIA. I'm just so sorry he was taken. He's a hero. He's a hero to me, John. He's a hero to a lot of people,
Yeah.
and deserves that recognition. And behind the scenes kind of hero. But I'm so glad at that cemetery, it's all there on that tombstone, Central Intelligence Agency. Uh, and That's about it from my side. If you have any more questions, please.
Yeah.
You did a
I
great job.
think
Thank you for
that's
helping me.
wonderful.
Having me.
And it's a privilege to be able to talk about this guy who's just an incredible officer, incredible father, incredible man, an incredible mentor.
That's for
And
sure.
Ralph, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Okay, John. Thank you. And you have a great holiday season. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And happy podcasting in 2026.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and perhaps happy podcasting to you too, Ralph.
Anytime.
And
Thank you, John.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and thank you so much. Great to have you on.
Thank you, buddy. Bye-bye.